Hey everybody, I'm Matt Hill. We are at the Talking Energy Show podcast, and like always, all my stuff has technical difficulties, and my friends are always very courteous about not kicking my butt about it, but let's just go around the room just in case and introduce ourselves. Again, I'm Matt Hill.
Scott Witt with American Cementing.
Michael Dunn, the Water Midstream.
Marshall Hall, Malorn Energy.
All right, well, Talking Energy Show. Marshall, how did you come up with that name for that company?
It's kind of a bit funny, but I really, my wife and I are pretty big nerds, and we love Lord of the Rings, and Malorn is a type of tree from Lord of the Rings. So we decided to name it after that, and make sure our nerddom was at least known a little bit.
That's a great series of books and movies too. I mean, I like them all. I had to read those when I was a kid. How'd you get in oil and gas?
Really, I didn't think I was ever, I wouldn't have thought I was ever going to work oil and gas, but when I went to school at Colorado School of Mines, I knew I wanted to be an engineer, and I was really looking for something that had a high ROI for what I was paying. I was an out-of-state student, and so found petroleum engineering. This was 2009, so the industry was really starting to take off, and I was encouraged by many people that worked for the school to look into it and try it out. Ended up going to a couple of introduction classes and just loved it and took off with it, and did a pretty good decision.
Yeah, where was the first company you worked at? Well, yeah, what's your kind of resume?
Yeah, background. So born and raised in Edmond, Oklahoma. Went to Edmond Memorial High School, and then I decided to go to school in Colorado at School of Mines, and did obviously petroleum engineering. Once I graduated, I went to work for Oasis Petroleum for about a year and a half. After I worked there for about a year and a half, I actually got offered by Ward Petroleum to work at their Fort Collins office, and kind of opened it up and worked their DJ asset they were starting to work on. I interned with them for two summers.
Nice.
So that's kind of how I knew those guys, and did that for 4 years. And they sold that asset to Great Western in 2018. And I went to work for Great Western as an assistant production manager. So I went from an operations manager, operations engineer role at Ward to an assistant production manager. And I did that for about a year. And then a similar group of people that were at Ward put together Red Wolf, which was a private equity company, and we did that for 2 years. Now I moved back to Oklahoma to do that. We worked about 200 wells in the Scoop Stack. We did that for 2 years, and then in September of last year, I guess now, we merged into Camino.
Camino, yep.
Yep. And so when that all happened, I decided it was time for me to start my own operating company. So
you just decided
was born. Well, it had been in the works. It had always been a dream for 40 years or so.
You know how to do drilling. You know how to do.
I knew how to do it all.
Production.
Yeah, I really kind of wanted to just have that chance to operate it myself. I kind of already done it myself for years at work in my own little small office.
You guys had how many wells you're looking at?
In the DJ?
Yeah.
In the DJ was really, when we started, it was 8 wells, and then we drilled it up. I think we had 30 or so by the time we sold. So it wasn't a lot. But if you're the only guy, and you're getting phone calls in the middle of the night, and you're kind of trying to put stuff together, and you're out and doing stuff, and kind of learn, okay, I think I could do this. Granted, it's with different people's money, but
So it's not uncommon to hear people say they'd like to start their own operator or E&P. So for you, why? What is your why, and what are your goals out of that?
Yeah. So the why is one. I think I can do it, but two, I think I've got a different take than maybe what other companies kind of do. My kind of the motive is to operate, or maybe not the motive, but the idea, the business plan is to operate low volume, low decline, conventional assets, and be the last operator that they see. I think there's a way to operate wells that have kind of been underlooked and maybe not taken care of as much. And in some cases they've been taken care of great, but somebody's not interested in operating them anymore. And to work it to where you're the last person that does it. Really, where that kind of came out of was obviously I worked a lot of I worked vertical wells. I'd seen how the vertical wells kind of got treated within larger companies, and not just with the companies I worked, but at other companies. And you talk back and forth with other people. I got some vertical wells, and we don't do a whole lot with them and that kind of thing. And you kind of just see that as a prevailing theme as shale has become what it is, and these conventional wells kind of just sit out there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of potential. Anyway, so that all being where it is, I think what really drove me to want to do this was I had seen when we sold the asset to Great Western, we had a small group of people, a couple pumpers, and I had to say goodbye to these people. And if you ever talk to people that are in the field, they get really involved with the companies they work for. Sometimes they're not even employed by the company; they're just contract, but they really like working for whoever it is.
Well, they're going out to check those wells.
Yeah, that's their babies. And then all of a sudden, sometimes you're stripping it away from them. And so part of it was, how can I provide not only like something that I love doing, but then maybe give these guys a job where I'm not going to walk away from these things. That's not the plan. I think, like I said, I want to be the last operator of the well seat. So that was really, it's a long way of saying that was kind of maybe where I wanted to take it in the end of it all. But the business plan really is to take those lower decline wells. And obviously, if you can have a better well than that, great.
Are you going out and doing that right now, like saying, hey, this is 5 barrels a day, but I think I can turn it into 10?
Yep. That's kind of the idea. And I would say that you can't find a lot of those.
Yeah.
What you quickly realize, or at least what I quickly realized, was as much as I thought I was unique in that aspect, I really wasn't. There's a lot of people that have very similar ideas as far as operate and either improve them, cut costs. And they may instead of operating them until the end, though, they may want to just sell them and flip them. So there's definitely a component to that one, which is a total viable business plan.
Yeah,
I think, comparing it to real estate, you have people who buy a home, fix it up and sell it. And you see people who buy an asset and they take production from a cumulative 10 barrels a day to a cumulative 20. So at that point, you theoretically double the value. And so it's definitely out there. And I think also a lot of the reason you see people looking to do this is because the entry point for a lot of this production is at a point that many people can reach within the oil and gas industry. If I want to sit there and drill a single horizontal well, say if somehow I was able to lease up a section, I want to drill a 1 mile lateral, okay, I've got however many hundreds of thousands or a couple $1 million, or many millions depending on what area you're in, but you got your land costs and then you actually go and spend $5 or $10 million drilling it. And at that point your entire investment is a single data point, which means if something goes wrong, so on and so on. So these marginal wells, they sit there and make half a barrel, a couple barrels a day, and
I'll take that.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of people who do that, and there's a lot of people who do that or inherited it in one way or another, and they didn't necessarily have the expertise to truly optimize it. So you look at the decline curves and say, this is not natural, something specifically happened, what did we do? Well, we didn't really know why. So we just kind of kept trying to milk along. And so there's a lot of stories out there. So the people will buy this set of 30 or 50 or 2 wells even as a starting point and either flip it, increase or flip it, or just like you said, take it to a nice easy grade to where there's some point in the future where it's no longer economic at commodity pricing.
Are you focused on any one area that you think is looking better right now?
Close to home?
Close to home is always good. If you can go visit the wells, if they're within a reasonable drive, that's the dream. I'm familiar with the Anadarko Basin, right? So that's really where I want to be. You kind of, I think if you want to do this kind of thing, you want to stay in a place that's a friendly regulatory environment. But for my history in Colorado, I think that you want to stay in a place where you're not worried about maybe prohibitive regulations that are going to make it difficult. And sometimes they're reasonable, but sometimes they're very expensive to just implement, let alone keeping up with.
No flaring, all of a sudden. Immediately, no flaring in the United States right now. If they just came down with that, how many people are going to be? Well, I'm out. I don't know what to do. We're going to plug out.
But here's what's interesting to offer a counter thought to that is that if you have the expertise to say, and you truly, you have experience in Colorado, so you're probably much more adept to handle the regulatory requirements there. So when those assets go on the market, the market's going to say, I'm not looking to be a new entry into Colorado because I realize I'm in over my head. People can say the same thing about BIA, BLM. So those are actually going to limit your competition for those assets. So just to kind of offer the counter argument, now I roughnecked there for 4 years, but that doesn't mean I know anything about the current regulatory status. So just, taking a look at what your background, this is for the audience, but taking a look at your background, your expertise, and is there something within my background that allows me to say, I know a little more than the next guy, therefore I can look at this asset and this challenge or this downside is not quite as large for me, and I know how to handle it easier, better, whatever it might be.
Sometimes it's having the confidence in yourself, and you hit on it. That's always been kind of, once you get kind of a stable base going to a place like a Colorado, there are deals to be made in places like that because of exactly what I said, what you nailed, which is that sometimes what looks like a problem is actually upside.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you gotta be able to value that risk, the political,
Yep.
the risk that comes with it, right?
Yeah,
You have to have some kind of foresight, see.
And some of it's baked in, right? So,
Yeah.
your purchase price might be completely reduced because of something like that.
And I think that's what you see most of the time. You know, you talk about flaring, for example, using that as an example for this conversation. If I'm buying 50 wells, and these 50 wells are all all oil wells, or even if they're all gas wells, but they're all on a pipeline, at the end of the day, and I have zero interest in drilling, no, I mean, the impact of this no flaring, I know they're talking about there's requirements on tanks potentially, so I'm not gonna say that there's not potentially more behind the curtains, but
Sure.
at the end of the day, the impact on a no flaring is significantly different for me, as just trying to hit the last 20 years of this decline versus drilling new wells, and is there a pipeline within a few miles of me, or is there, so, again, what's my specific situation, what are my specific resources, and what challenges can I overcome more easily than the next guy possibly?
Speaking of which, before we go any further, Michael Dunn, everybody, give your little resume real quick. You know, how'd you get into oil and gas, and where have you been?
Laydown crew was my first oil and gas job. Worked on a laydown casing crew for a while.
Scary stuff.
A little bit, very eye-opening in the way the world works.
And you stayed in oil and gas.
And I stayed in oil and gas. I roughnecked for a little over 4 years. At that point, my goal was I went to college, I quit the rigs, and I went to college, had zero interest in getting back into oil and gas. Just so happened the school I went to was heavily recruited. Since I had an oil and gas background, it kind of worked out very well that I had opportunity existing. Spent a decade working for Unit Petroleum, drilling completion production, and spent some time working at Marathon.
That's where I met him, petroleum.
Yeah.
I pulled him out to a golf tournament one time. We had a great time.
Yes, it has been a few years, what, 15?
Oh gosh, it's been 15 years ago.
Plus, maybe more, yeah.
Wow.
At this point, I own interest. I've operated wells, like you. I've operated wells. I own interest in a few hundred wells, and I also work at Lagoon Water Midstream, so my first venture into the...
Real estate too. This guy everywhere. Yeah, he's all over the place.
So my current vantage point is the non-operator side of the desk and midstream, so a lot of new vantage points and learning a lot.
Water, the future of our industry, how we're going to get
It
it,
really
how we're
is.
going to maintain it, and how we're going to clean it. It's all up to us on the water.
There, some areas, especially Permian, where they have less water available to them.
Some people are just cutting, operators off from water.
Yeah.
Hey, no more.
Because it's not something, as far as I know, you don't have the right to sit there and, do a surface damage act or some other say you have to X, Y, or Z for that, because it's not a resource that we can require. And so you've got the water restrictions, of course, you have the socio-political environment, you have, the big buzzword ESG, but the fact is that these large operators are heavily driven by what the markets say they want and what the money people say they want, and like it or not, ESG is here, and it's up to us to figure out, okay, here's a challenge, and how can we make the best of this challenge while still making sure that we're either making good investments for ourselves or our companies or the shareholders. But at the end of the day, it's a huge challenge, and you see the industry shifting and trying to feel out, okay, where...
Embracing and monetizing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's capitalism at its best, and that's a good thing, because we're saying there's challenges, and there's people that are finding solutions, and sometimes do a little back and forth and comes and flows and ebbs, but at the end of the day, we're going to find a solution to it that works well. Then
Our industry is the best at finding those solutions.
in a few more years, everyone's going to be doing this, and there's going to be some guy over here trying this one thing because he thinks it'll work a little bit better. But then next thing you know, that might be the next solution, it might not be, but I feel like the industry is large enough and there's enough opportunity in it, there's enough future in it, that we're going to grow the way we have to grow to continue on.
What about you, Scott? How'd you get into oil and gas?
Well, I came into oil and gas from the business perspective, but as I was saying before, not to date myself too much, but I got out of high school in 1986 when the oil business was bad, and my freshman counselor told me, do not get into the oil business, because I think her husband had just gotten laid off at the time, so.
You really listen to people.
Yeah, I did. I listened to her. Yeah, I did listen to her. Yeah. So I went through journalism school at the University of Oklahoma, and then later came back to oil and gas after several other careers.
Greeting cards, we just talked about
Yeah,
that.
newspaper, greeting cards, construction,
Yeah.
and IT and supply chain. I've done all those things. So
I came to see him in a tool belt reading a poem on his greeting card. Do you remember any of the greeting cards you wrote at all?
Absolutely not.
You can't even make one up right now for us.
I'm sorry.
I do not. I don't remember any of them.
He's got
No.
I wish you could just make one up for us right now.
I couldn't do it.
Did they rhyme, or did you do more like haiku?
Yeah, actually, I can write an haiku. That's funny. I had a computer engineer friend of mine back in the day where all of our emails we wrote back to each other were in haiku.
Nice. Well played.
Nobody else understood.
Well
Nobody
played.
else figured that.
Doug, what are these two nerds
Yeah.
totally talking about?
Oh, yeah, I'm there too. Yeah, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
So you've read Lord of the Rings.
I have not read Lord of the
Oh,
Rings.
so
I've seen
you're-
the movies.
you gotta do it.
I've seen the
Tolkien
movies.
is, I'll tell you what, you think, I've read the Silmarillion.
There you go. Yeah.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we've got it.
We need- yeah,
And it is a haul. And as a
It's-
big fan, it is
thick.
quite hard to read. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it'll just suddenly skip tons of time, and you'll be like,
Yeah.
what just happened?
What just happened?
Yeah.
No, but I did see that movie about Tolkien that they just made. That
What?
You
The
know,
biopic, yeah.
yeah. And that was really interesting.
I've not seen this yet, I can't wait to see it.
No, I didn't see it in theaters, but
Okay.
you definitely, I don't remember what streaming service I'm on, I'm sure you can watch it.
Independent
It's
channel or
pretty,
something like that,
it's
yeah.
pretty good. I mean, it's interesting.
For those just watching, everybody in this room, I try to bring in here, nerd, nerd alert, I love nerds, I'm a nerd, yeah.
Yeah, and you were talking earlier about how he had, a lot of the stuff he had written was, connected to what he went through during World War I, which is, he talks about in that movie. It's really interesting. Was that your kid?
They've
You
got
don't
like
realize
very, very strong
where this comes
visuals
from.
that tie what's going on in what his mind with
Anti-industrial, probably anti-oil and gas at the
Yeah.
time, but see, I'm more Ayn Rand, I'm like, hey, look, progress and capitalism, it'll change all the world. I wonder if they ever met, and he just didn't like her and wrote Tolkien, wrote all those just because of her.
It could have been they crossed paths. I wouldn't be surprised if it did.
New theory out there, that was his ex-girlfriend. He went the other way. He likes fairies, she likes money. Anyway, back to oil and gas. So I think, first of all, does anybody in this room know, and I've challenged our audiences many times, how many wells are running in the U.S. land right now? Like still producing? Total U.S. land
Active?
producing, active
Wow.
producing wells.
Put a plug out there for drilling info, I bet they could tell us really quick.
Man, I mean, really.
I have a laptop.
700,000?
I have an inverse app.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I know, that's why I put it out there, because I want to know how many active wells are producing
Okay.
in the United States
So I
right now.
will tell you, I'll go back to my office, because I know that my opening screen on drilling info has it all lit up. So I will get you a number that way. When you post
The
this
first
video.
person's gonna get me a number, I want the full
Because it's out
number.
there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care if it's, like you said, half a barrel, 1 barrel, 5 barrels,
Just, yeah,
active
active
wells
wells.
in the US.
But
In
it's,
the US.
it's
Because when you say a lot of people,
It's gotta be.
Yeah,
a lot of people are thinking about what you are doing
Yeah, exactly.
and wanting to go that direction, there's not enough people doing what you're doing. There's not enough people that are go, I'm gonna go start my own company. We don't need to plug all these wells in the US that are 5 barrels a day or less. We need to have guys like you that go out there and go, don't plug them. We need, all across the globe right now, we see that people are energy hungry. They're Europe right now. Europe, they're supposed to be better off than us, supposed to have the best culture, on the planet, and they are starving for energy. So here we are with all these marginal wells that guys like you can go out, turn them into 5 to 10, 10 to 20, and give more energy to the globe. So no one's out there burning cow poop, and their children are starving in a hut somewhere.
Well, I'm curious about the economics of that, if you've looked into that, because I come from the cement side, P&A, it's not cheap to P&A a well, right?
Yeah.
So the economics have got to be, it's got to be.
One thing to keep in mind though is that a lot of these wells, these marginal wells, are oftentimes very shallow. And so you pretty much just have one string of pipe.
Yeah.
And you're not really even trying to pull pipe. I mean, or you do, and it's just a small amount. So the P&A on a well that's 1,500 or 4,500 foot deep
Right.
is very, very different than a 20,000 foot measured depth. And
Then you got 3 packers in.
Yeah. And I guess it depends
Fish
on-
in the hole. And
Yeah, I think that Oklahoma's the regulatory is a little easier than Texas Railroad Commissions and other places. where you
it's
have to-
definitely, what I tell people, so P&A is definitely the thing to think about.
So
When
that's
you're
what's
getting
on your mind
especially-
when you're going to go even
Of
look
course.
to buy a well. Am I going to have to P&A this right when I
Right,
buy
that's
it?
the thought is I'm going to be the last operator that sees them, right? So
Okay.
I'm thinking about the P&A the entire time. And so, I mean, part of the business plan is to just set aside money into basically a sinking fund, okay? That in itself maybe probably goes into some sort of an investment that hopefully we'll get a return that will outpace inflation, right? But when you look and you talk to people and you bid out what plugging costs are, and we're talking mostly Oklahoma, you can go talk to other people and I'm sure they'll tell you my costs are really low. But you're seeing anywhere from $25,000, $30,000, $35,000 to plug a well. And sometimes cheaper,
And oftentimes,
sometimes more expensive.
I plugged many, many wells where I was paid to plug it. If you
Yeah.
have a good enough surface facilities,
Yep.
and you have good tanks and you got a good battery, then it's gonna offset if you have enough surface. Some of the benefits of the deeper wells is if you've got a 10,000 foot string of 7-inch, and you got your top of cement in there at 8,000 foot, and you can
get it all out.
salvage half of that. I think you kind of assume you can get half of it is what you shoot for.
Especially now with what pipe costs are.
Yeah,
no kidding.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now's the best time to plug a well.
So, at the end of the day, in a prior life, I had a project where I plugged over 80 wells in a short period of time. And so we bid it all out as a package. And at the end of the day, for the operator, we received a check to plug it.
One company went out there and plugged all the
I
wells.
think we broke it up in 3 or 4 packages
Okay.
because it was Texas Panhandle, Western Oklahoma.
Gotcha.
But we broke it into 3 or 4 kind of geographic, kind of look at it and where they scattered.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, my company got a check for, and ended up being a net positive, plus getting rid of the liability. But, for the audience, you're saying that the average cost 25, 35, those are very reasonable. But on the higher side, or you get in different states, or you get into more complex well bores, you can very, very quickly get up to $100,000, $200,000 plus.
That's very right.
And so when someone's looking at buying, I think that's another reason you see a lot of these marginal wells tend to be the shallow wells, because say I get this really complex well bore and it maybe has a plugging cost of $200,000, even if it's making 5 barrels a day and I can get it up to 10, when you factor in the fact that you're going to take it to that end life, you still are going to have very challenged economics potentially.
Are you still responsible once you plug that well? It's still yours though, right? Because I'm seeing, there's a lot of political stuff going on, but like I go to LinkedIn and I see like Sarah out there, talking about this stuff in West Texas where that whole ranch
Yes,
is,
yes.
just going bananas right now. So did the operator think that their wells were plugged well? And the Texas Railroad Commission came out there and checked them, and everything was okay, and everybody's like, okay, well,
I think the thing.
or was it like, did they really get paid off? Or, there's so many questions and stuff like that. So you, as an operator, you pay somebody to go plug that well, you're like, okay, cool, I'm good.
Yeah.
Where does that, did you think that for Oklahoma, if you plug well here, did the Corporation Commission come out and check it and go, okay, it's good? Did they really check it? And at the end of the day, you're still responsible. You're on the hook if anything happens.
So, and I can't speak to every state, but most states they're the ones who approve the procedure with which the well is plugged, and they have rules around what has to be done. And so, speaking to the West Texas thing, I think I had seen that the well was maybe from the 40s.
Yeah.
Might have been a dry hole.
Hardly any paperwork on it.
Yeah, and you find those all the time. Those are everywhere.
Yep.
Whether they're public or not, you just don't know. And I've heard stories of when people go in, re-enter some of these wells, what they find are telephone poles and all kinds of just trash they just threw in the hole.
Yeah.
That was what they plugged it with.
Okay.
But you got to establish that rules are very different now. So if I were to plug a well now, I'd be pretty confident nothing would come back.
Right. Technology's changed for
technology is
sure.
Changed, yeah.
Requirements.
Our knowledge of what actually, when you see stuff like that happens, what causes something like that, that's what those rules are meant to do is mitigate. I can't speak for what that well was, but it's very likely that no one even knew it was there.
For those maybe watching the very first time, and you're not even in oil and gas, just by chance. We are stewards of our environment. We're stewards of our resources. Everybody in this room and our entire industry is working for one goal: producing affordable, reliable, abundant energy for the world. And we love our earth. We love the people in it. We wouldn't be doing this any other way. Sure, it's profitable, but that's what everybody wakes up and goes to a job somewhere, out for profit for themselves. We're just lucky enough to be, providers of energy. So, I know there's a lot of rhetoric out there about how the oil and gas, hates the environment, but we're always working on solutions to make it better.
When you look at the standard we hold now, compare it to, for example, this well from the 1940s, I'm going to say that when that well had operations in the 1940s, they were probably maintaining the standard that existed then. Now, I'm also going to say that in another 50 years, they're going to look at what we do today
You think they're
and say, oh my goodness, how could they have?
Yeah.
But, one of the things to recognize is that oftentimes we are making judgments based on current knowledge. And oftentimes the knowledge we currently hold is very different than the knowledge that was held back then. So you're holding them to a current standard, but is that reasonable? Is that fair? The industry, I think, is very safe to say that the standard we hold is absolutely better, without a doubt, even over the last 10 or 15 years. Even over the last several months, you're seeing significant shifts in the industry. Again, and so we're listening as new knowledge, as new information, as catastrophes. You hate that a catastrophe occurred, but as a problem area occurs, then there's a lot of people.
So what we do is science. So there's going to be catastrophes. There's going to be hiccups, and then we learn from them, and we do way better next time.
Absolutely. And then there'll be another hiccup, and we'll learn from that. And to me, that's the way any industry goes.
Yep.
Bridges, they used to test bridges by letting an elephant cross it, right?
Yep.
If somehow an elephant had this innate sense.
Look at COVID. They're jabbing us all the time. These experimental drugs. I just don't even know, if I'm going to grow a third arm out, or I'm not, because I'm going to jab it.
Yeah, to your point, engineering is engineering to some degree, and you learn from what came before, right? Engineering an oil well is not much different in that space as engineering a tall building, right?
Yeah.
And you have to learn how those dynamics affect.
Absolutely.
So Scott and I were, talking earlier, and cement's interesting to me because of all the things out there on drill sites. Well, the mud that's going to go through the pipe no matter what and come back up, and you're going to get returns.
Hopefully, yes.
You know, yeah. I mean, there's times where you're not going to get returns. You know, it's a bad day when you don't get returns. But the cement can't lock up on the way down through the pipe as it's coming back and surrounding, you know, your casing.
That never happens.
It never happens. You know, you don't want to go out and drill out, you know, the entire stream full of cement, you know, if it's pumped wrong. But that's, you know, fascinating to me. Like, so geothermal drilling now, right? Like, you're going to look at 600-degree temperatures in some places, and you have to have the right cement for that job. You know, so there's no end of the chemistry that's going to be involved in the technique of, you know, the future of cement. I mean, that's what's so cool about our industry. There's not one piece of the things we do out there that are not going to change and get better over time.
Right.
And cement's fascinating to me just because it's got to make sure the chemistry doesn't, you know, it doesn't set up in the tube going down, and it sets up in the right place coming back up and surrounding casing. It's got to be the right temperature, and it sets up at the right time.
Compressive strength.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely.
How fast does it build?
Can be
Strength?
flexible.
Yeah.
I mean,
When you start getting losses.
Yeah. the right
does it
LCM,
corrode the outside? You know, does the chemicals inside that cement corrode the outside of the casing?
How
You
quickly
know,
do you need to control
Does it-
water, gas?
does it mess up the rock? You know, also is it good for the environment around it? You know, because what if, you know, water is going by there? You know, I mean, there's
Cement additives are the biggest, you know, improvement over the last 25 years, and accelerators and, you know, retarders, those dialing in that, the engineers that do that, and I'm certainly not one of those, but, you know, we have so many of these guys that I learned so much from.
The chemistry involved.
That can do that, and they know those basins so well and how that reacts and at that temperature is amazing.
And those guys that do it day in, day out, you know, just knowing that the difference between the water well that's feeding your drilling rig today, or the load of water, could be the difference between that job going off well or not. Because if they're testing that cement in the lab and they get tap water, that would not be representative of the water. So that is, because keep in mind that you definitely want to make sure that cement doesn't set up too soon. But on the flip side of that, I also don't want the drilling rig sitting here waiting for 8 hours. You know, how long do you wait to drive on your driveway when you get a driveway for it? A drilling rig isn't going to wait that long. So you want it to wait long enough to be in place, a little margin of safety in case you got to shut pumps down or something like that. But then, theoretically, in a perfect world, you want it to set up instantly.
Yep.
Because you got this rig, you got a $50 or $70 or $100,000 spread rate a day coming at you. I don't want to wait for cement. So I want to what's the minimum amount of time that I can wait on that cement and still safely get the job off. And when you know that it's just a matter of you know, the type of water we're sampling versus mixing it with, even when, again, talking about how complex cement is, they oftentimes batch mix this.
Right.
So you have this huge silo, and it starts with all the base elements, and they maybe pour a couple sacks of this other chemical in. But at the end of the day, is it perfectly mixed up? How long does it take to perfectly mix up a truckload of cement? Because when you are testing that, when you're doing that test in the sample, what do? You get your little cup.
This is representative of the entire.
You've got how many thousands of
Do
pounds?
we need more whiskey, by the way?
So you've got how many thousands of pounds of cement being mixed up, and you're pulling a sample cup. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sample cup's about this big. And so did you get a representative sample? And so there's so many areas this can go wrong, and the fact that the guys are so good and they make it go right, I mean, 99.9% of the time is really just says a lot to the effort.
Are we giving our drilling program and AFEs like enough focus on cement?
I would say it's largely.
When you're writing an AFE, is that, okay, so there's the drilling contractor, I mean, there's so much stuff out there on location, right? I mean, and how much does the AFE go to cement? Or do you want to go cheap?
Cement is a relatively low cost when it comes to the end result of a drilling AFE.
Yeah.
Then it probably gets forgotten about as far as a cost basis more than often than not.
But how?
When you're talking about wellbore construction,
For the
besides your casing
perpetuity
design,
of that,
might be the
yeah.
most important thing.
Right.
But it's such an easy, I completely agree with what you're saying, but we both have drilling backgrounds, and we've both seen that it is, am I going to raise top of cement to 10,000 foot? Or am I going to raise top of cement to 8,000 foot? Am I going to run a DV tool just to make sure I get top of cement? And so it's such an easy button. If I want to shave $10,000 or $20,000 off, or a few hours of waiting on cement time, and so it's a very scary place because it's such an easy button to shave a few $10,000 off your AFE or a little bit of rig time that people can start pushing that button until you realize maybe it's 5 years later, this zone's depleted, you want to go up hole. Oh great, now I got to punch holes in my cement and do a squeeze job.
And it's way more expensive.
Absolutely.
So when you're talking about well construction, it is besides your casing design, making sure that's absolutely right. It's the easiest way to ruin a well.
Okay.
And how often does a poor cement job create a poor frac job that you can't even quantify because you're not looking at it? You have very little ways to measure it. It's expensive to measure, which is what my brother does. But you know, you're fracking the hill of a well. the frac job's coming up the hole, they don't even know that, right? You know, most of the time, and because of either poor centralization, you know, poor cement job, or whatever you might say, and it's not from poor design of cement, it's poor engineering of placement, or just cutting corners because you know you can. And you can't, those things people don't know.
Poor cement happen.
Well, no, we wouldn't want to. No cementer would,
No.
right? And no operator would either if you could measure the effect, and that's hard to measure.
All the wells you bought, are they all, did they all have cement, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you've got surface casing, you've got production casing. These are
You
relatively shallow
you
wells.
didn't buy any wells that you found wooden casing in them?
Thank goodness.
I've seen all the, like, you know, you've read about these, right? Like wooden casing.
Yeah.
You know,
I have an
cement.
old rod, like a sucker rod,
Right.
a piece of wood.
Really?
Yeah, and it's held together with like these metal rivets, but that's all. It's really just wood.
Okay.
Wow, and that came out of one of your wells you bought?
No.
You're like really going deep here.
I had a guy who, I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge, and he just happened to be like, hey, I've got this. Would you like this? And so it's kind of a trophy that you
Heck
keep.
yeah, I got that.
Just to remember that, you know, when you go and look at a sucker rod and it looks really, you know, maybe it looks kind of rough and garbagey. You've got this wooden thing that they used to pump these wells with, and they, you know, these are probably, you know, a couple 100 feet wells, but it's amazing what we've come, how far we've come in 100 years of operating.
What's the age of some of the wells you're looking at?
What's the oldest well you have?
The oldest well I have is, I think, 1974.
Okay, not terrible.
So not crazy. You look, the oldest well I've ever operated was 1956, I believe.
Oh, wow.
And obviously there would be people who've operated much older wells.
Did you get to go back and look at, like, you know, any of the information on how they drilled it, or did you find any of that?
So what you'll find is data collection. So you have reports. You have
Right.
normally you have a physical file, and then at some point it went digital. And normally along the way, a lot of information gets lost or is miscategorized. And then you have, let alone that you have the well has changed hands several times. So you don't normally have a lot of data. Sometimes you have a decent amount of data. I would say as far as production goes, typically, unless you're looking at like re-entering or something pretty dramatic, like a recompletion, you're not really going back and looking at drilling data. You're probably looking at like production, wellbore history, and if you know, tracing back what's happened on the well, and why maybe they skipped over a zone or just different things.
Yes, so, you know, thankfully, the regulatory databases has a lot. Now, when you start getting into older well bores, we all know that there's a lot of well bores out there that are not even documented at this point.
Yeah.
But, you know, disregarding stuff pre-1950s, 1960s, I don't know exactly where that threshold, that button is, but at the end of the day, you want to know where's my top of cement, which we were talking about. Oftentimes it's not as high up as you want.
Yeah.
And you also want to know what kind of casing, because you have your casing diameter, your ODID, you have your casing weight, which is going to impact your ODID, you got your P110, or, you know, whatever you're doing there. And those are going to basically be your limiting factors when it comes to recompleting or producing a well. Or I'll say recompleting, because normally when you're producing a well, you're not challenging the limits of any of it. You presume there's already cement down there. But anytime you have a zone that's down here, you say, okay, no longer economic, I want to move up hole. One, do I have cement? Hopefully I do. If not, then say a few curse words and start figuring out, okay, where's my top of cement? Get the loggers out there, hopefully, you know, but, you know, it ties back in, because oftentimes, even nowadays, you have the specialists that are so knowledgeable about their specific slice of the pie. And what's interesting about your background is that because you've worked drilling, completions, production, you've worked all those different sides, you're able to see that as a drilling engineer, I can do a lot of things to cut my AFE. And no one will ever know.
Your completions team will.
They might not. They might
They're gonna show up and go, what the
when you just start talking about getting a big dog leg in your cut. You know, the production guy's going to throw a fit if you throw a big 15 or 20 degree dog leg in your cut.
Okay,
And that's not even necessarily something that's going to show up on your records, because you only do your 30-foot survey. And your 30-foot surveys over a 10-foot slide, and it just happened to be a 10-foot slide
Missed
yielded.
that.
And so it's averaging out, right? And so at the end of the day, I'm digressing some, but where's my top of cement? If the top of cement's not high enough, then we've got to get it up high enough. And then what kind of pressures can I pump if I'm doing another frac job, or, you know, having to put some pressure on the well?
What kind of pressure are you comfortable pumping even, right?
With older well bores.
Older well bores, older casing that probably is definitely degraded over time in some form or fashion. So you're going to have to
I would assume
pump down
casing-
tubing, because that's going to limit your rate.
Yeah. I would assume casing probably ages harder than the cement itself. You know,
Yeah, so if you have to
takes a
squeeze,
lot.
normally you're fine. If you don't have to squeeze, I think that if you see top of cement is above the zone of interest, you're happy, right? And you're probably not going to even think about quality at that point, as long as
It's there.
you've got enough cement over the top of you. Yeah, and then it's, how are you gonna complete it? Is it gonna be via tubing, or are you gonna have to run the well, and what pressure, what's your max pressure you're gonna be able to pump in, or do you have to pump it all? Maybe it's really conventional.
I assume you guys have seen casing in bad shape in some of these wells.
You don't physically see it most of the time,
Well,
right?
sure, right.
You can see videos of it, and it's pretty gnarly.
I mean,
So when you go and buy an asset, you're not going to drill right. I mean, I'm sure at some point you'll go and drill your own well. I'm sure you're getting excited about that at some point.
Yeah.
But you've taken over other people's, like, what's the challenges you've seen the most? Like, I go out and buy all these wells, I'm going to operate them myself. What usually is like the hardest thing for you to take, control over out there?
So
Is it the facilities are all messed up? Is it the well bore?
it's just understanding what the history is. I think the first thing to do anytime you have an asset that you've bought, especially wells, I mean, it's the same with the house. You'd really like to know what's happened.
behind the
And
wall.
sometimes you find out, like, I think we used the house analogy earlier. Houses really, like, if you want to talk about investing into wells, it's a pretty good analogy. You instead of having maybe a flat rate of cash flow, you have a commoditized rate, so you're selling barrels and maybe you have downtime. So think about it, you don't have a renter in the house for a day, right, if you have
Right.
downtime in the well. But it's very similar to houses. Like, if you buy a rental house that you're going to fix up and flip, or fix up and just keep and have the cash flow, you want to know what has happened in it. And I think that if you're going through the well records and you can't figure it out, and you don't know what you don't know, that's the scary part. And so when you can put that together, and you're kind of like a historian in a way. You're kind of going back, and sometimes it's talking to people, that
The pumper that's been out there 30 years.
yeah, he's like,
Okay.
oh yeah, they did this, and you're like, that's nowhere in the well record at all. No one ever said anything about this. It's not recorded, anything. Sometimes you would love that in the state record. It should be.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not.
I mean, it's interesting because
That pumper and his phone number should be in that state record.
That's probably like your key. Like if you
That's the go-to
first
guy.
Yeah, it's the go-to guy. If you
we'll
can
talk
talk
to
to
the pumper.
him.
How long's he been out there?
Yeah. Oh, I've been out here for 2 days. Okay, you're probably not gonna help me.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I've been out 10
Yeah.
years. He knows
Yeah.
some stuff. He may know a guy who knows a guy or been told something.
So, every well has a personality, especially when you get to the marginal producers, and hopefully they're have some type of enhanced recovery. But every well has its personality, and figuring out what that personality is. And so if you're not able to really gather a lot of this information in the due diligence phase before you actually acquire the assets, then I completely agree with Marshall that you're going to be trying to figure out what's the personality, what do I actually have, what needs fixed right away, what can wait a few weeks or a few months, and because you're balancing probably cash flow versus how much money do I need to spend fixing these things.
What's
And
the cheapest way to go fix a well that you think you can, get ramped up?
I mean, so
You take a camera down first, all the way down and back up, and see like, okay, well, there's no obstacles, so now, and I can see I'm watching the flow, what's all available.
I would be a landman a little bit, and if there's any landmen, cover your ears. But they always hedge what they say.
Yeah, landmen are not the
But
people
it
who do it.
depends on the well. It depends on
I'll
the
say it
well.
right here.
You've got obstructions of some sort of the well. If you've got a rod pump well, it's more difficult to know exactly what your mechanism is going to be to enhance the well. It could be just chemical. You could pump. You may have paraffin just gumming up your perfs,
Yeah.
and it could be as simple as pumping some chemical and cleaning it up. You don't really know. But if you've got a gas well, one of the best things to do is just go and see if there's something to swab off the well. If it's plunger lifted,
Shoot a fluid level.
shoot at fluid level is maybe the number one thing ever to do. And go do that. If you can find out where fluid is at, what your bottom hole pressures appear to be from the fluid level, that's going to tell you a lot. And then from there, you kind of be the next step. But in general, if you're looking at a gas well, swabbing is relatively cheap. It's really fast, and you're going to know real fast how fast it worked out. And I've seen wells where we swabbed just a couple barrels, and we've seen rates go from 10 MCF a day to 200.
Now-
That's just a couple. So that's just it. I mean, you might have loosened something up elsewhere, but
So for the audience,
Wow.
a little context of what you're saying. So when you sit there and you swab a couple of barrels, you could be pulling, depending on how many barrels you're pulling, you could be pulling a few hundred to several hundred to even 1,000 or more feet of fluid off of the wellbore.
Yeah.
And so when you
High
swab
stack,
that, and because you have this column of fluid that's holding that gas down, so you swab that, if it kicks off at that point, great, it kicked off, it may be fine now,
Yeah.
or maybe fine for another several months where you go back and swab it, or you can put the wellbore on a timer, you can put some type of plunger lift on there. So at that point, again, it's a little bit of a detective cat and mouse game. What information am I starting with? Okay, I get a clue, I shoot a fluid level, okay, the fluid level seems a little high, or what's my casing pressure versus tubing pressure? And so each little piece of information goes in the puzzle, but you never actually know what the front of the box on this puzzle looks like. So, okay, great, I think I found a corner piece.
Yep.
Another corner piece, and as you get a few more clues, okay, you're obviously always going to be missing pieces of the puzzle, especially on older marginal wells. And so, okay, here's what I think is supposed to be here, and hopefully you've made a reasonable guesstimate. And at the end of the day, if there's improvement to be had, hopefully you find economic improvement. But, oftentimes when you have these marginal wells, a lot of them are rod pump, and you say, oh, when's the last time you changed out? Well, we're trying to shave costs, and so we just haven't got.
It's been 10 years.
Yeah, so it's been 10 years since you changed out the
10
pump.
years.
Well, that would, if before then you were changing that every year, and there's no reason to believe that you've made any significant changes to prolong that timing. And so it's oftentimes, again, going back to who owns it, what's the knowledge level, or the drivers for the person that's, because you can even have a set of assets where someone's trying to cut costs, because again, these assets are valued off of this cash flow.
Cash flow.
And so if you're able to cut costs in the short term at the expense of long term, but you're not paying that price, so you can sit there and cut your chemical program. And I want to make my cash flow look better because I've reduced $10,000 a month worth of chemical program. And so now my this well bore is going to be, or this group of wells is worth more today than it was a year ago because I started pinching pennies on these certain things, not changing out pumps quite as much.
Yeah.
But the next guy comes in.
So if there's a corrosion problem,
Yeah,
you
he's
got
got
the
a
chemical program.
paraffin problem, or corrosion problem, or some other type of weird mojo happening down there. And so, again, it's very interesting because you have landmen that operate, you have engineers that operate, you have, there's all sorts of people that go in there and operate, and each one has their own set of skills. And then at the end of the day, there really is some pretty critical components. And so, are you either knowledgeable enough to handle your weaknesses? Are your weaknesses strong enough to still address it, or are you comfortable enough or willing to admit you're in over your head on this aspect? And hire professional help. I think that's one of the most highly underutilized assets, or
Just talk to people who know about it.
Yeah, talk to vendors.
There's people, you've been
Right here, hey, if you're going to go operate your own wells, these two guys right here. They're giving you a lot of calls.
I'd love, yeah.
Three
I'd love to tell you, but
three listeners in Kazakhstan are going to call you. Just saying.
If I tell my mom that I was
Yeah,
on the podcast, man,
your mom's going to call you.
Yeah,
But you're, so, one of the reasons to reach out to Mark, he understands, like, you're younger, quite a bit younger than me, so you understand, like, our industry loves technology and they love social media platforms. I love your Twitter posts. I love your LinkedIn posts are always spot on. You've always been very good about sharing knowledge and data with people, and that's one of the reasons I reach out to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
But if you're not on LinkedIn, you got to be there. It's our industry's Facebook. Marshall's, man, he's posted a lot of great data over the years.
Yeah, Twitter too.
Twitter, smoking it on Twitter.
Twitter's really a fun place to be. It's also kind of a black hole. So you gotta be
it's a place where I used to go and collect liberal tears, and now I've gone to. I've tried, like, look, my wife was very kind to go, hey, wouldn't you be better off at trying to educate others and bring them to our side? And I still ride that line a little bit. I get on Twitter and I see you guys and I see, like, Colin and the Digital Wildcatters. I'm like, or I could go back to collecting liberal tears.
So there's an active oil and gas community on Twitter.
So
huge.
Energy Financial Twitter, EFT, is really fun, and there's a lot of, I would say, I don't do anything original, because a lot of the guys that are on there are just so smart. And there are a lot of them are anonymous accounts.
He's smart.
And you can get such good free information.
Why don't you have an anonymous account? I don't either.
I could never keep up with an anonymous account, for one thing. I'd probably mess up and post stuff. But
Yeah.
there's funny anonymous accounts, there's serious anonymous accounts, but then you've got people who are like me, who will just say what they want to say. But it's just a really fun platform.
It's a fun platform.
I would say, so I try to limit my screen time by social media app and
It's
other
hard.
apps. That's the app that it's hard for me to limit, but I have one. I have a stop, limit set. So typically that means I'm getting on my computer instead of my phone to get on there. But there's just a lot of good stuff in there.
There you go. Start a Twitter account for American.
If you never post, just following some of those accounts, you're gonna find so much good content that
Just about oil and gas stuff. It's incredible how much oil and gas knowledge is out there on Twitter.
and they're just posting it. And again, I don't know.
Especially
I
investments.
I don't care to track down any of these people, to be honest, because I value the stuff they post.
Yeah.
And they're actually, I've made this idea up and what I wanted to do a long time ago, but there was some inspiration from some of the guys that are on there they operate their own wells too. So, you hate to say, if they can do it, I can do it too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what you want to try to do, and it's just a fun place to be. And LinkedIn's great.
I hope more young leaders emulate what you're doing, and you too, both of you guys.
And I've had a couple people reach out and say, hey, I'd like to do it too, and what I found is the people that I've reached out and done that to, they've been so helpful. I would love to do the same, right? Now, who doesn't want to try to help somebody who's trying to do that kind of thing? And
That's where I'm at in my career. Is I've been so blessed, and God's been good to me. What can I do right now to advocate for our industry, to highlight amazing leaders in our industry? I mean, that's what all of us have done a really good job about. And I watched somebody from Digital Wildcatters the other day. They're like, our whole job is to talk about our industry and to promote it and to advocate for it and put out content
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than what, in energy, in any sense, provides to people and lifestyle.
I think you're both touching on a really important point, is that I think there's one of the key failings within this industry is I think we fell short educating others. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and good, right, wrong, indifferent, doesn't matter. A lot of that misinformation is passed on with good intent.
Mhm.
And so when we are involved in those conversations, I know it's humorous, and you and I had a conversation, it's been a year or two ago, I don't remember that, but I called you on the phone and was like, hey, you're
I know, I was
you're kind
mad.
of aggressive there,
I
buddy.
was being mean.
And-
I was definitely being mean.
And at the end of the day, though, each one of these conversations is
You said it. I think you said it more than Misty did. Like, you should be a better Christian man.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity to educate.
To educate and explain, because there's so much misunderstanding, even within our industry. If you sit there and ask someone who is in, say, Reservoir, and start asking them, how do you think this happens? And, again, because we have all these very, very specialized.
And we like Reservoir engineers. We're not knocking you.
I ask a drilling guy about production. I mean, because how many drilling guys have thrown a huge dog leg in the middle of their back bill, so it's up high on the rod string, and see how that affects your rod string.
Massive deviation just anywhere,
Yeah.
right? Like, in the lateral, so you've got a horizontal well.
Yeah, you've
that
got
has
dog
dramatic
legs.
effects on your production.
So at the end of the day, each one of these conversations is an opportunity, and I hope, and not to say I'm perfect, I'm far from it, but I hope we all try to take the high road and try to fully understand what's their concern.
I can go out and hunt on his land anytime I want, so I'm going to say he's pretty close to perfect.
What's their concern? Try to fully understand their concern and where they're coming from, because their concern, you can sit there, oh, that's wrong. Well, you can tell them, I think, are you married?
Yes.
Well, okay, so we're all married in this room.
And we've all outkicked our coverage, by the way.
And we've all seen how well it works when we just flat out say you're wrong. So what do you have to do? You have to understand the concern.
Right.
Is then, where's the validity in it? Where can I help them better understand where we're coming from and what we're trying to do? And it's not that different. I'm not trying to say it's exactly the same. But at the end of the day, I think that's somewhere this industry can do better as a whole. And it's a lot of fun to sit there and say, well, that idiot, because we're educated. We're likely more educated. You watch the shows on TV, what was it, Black Gold?
Oh, man,
Is
all
that show
those
still
in the
on?
stream are super
The Black
fortunate.
Gold show?
Yeah.
Is this still on, really?
I think so.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea. Anyway, so we sit there and we laugh at it. At the end of the day, other people are watching that and thinking, is that really what happens on all these drilling rigs?
Yeah.
And then they Google and see there's 600 drilling rigs running in the country, and they think we got a bunch of clowns running around.
Are we at 600 yet? We're pretty close.
I don't think we're quite at that.
I hope so.
I couldn't tell you what the count is.
Six, five.
It's five something, 570 something.
Well, listen,
Anyway, educate others.
educate others. And that's what this whole thing's about.
But to his point, I mean, how often have we talked inside the industry about how we've missed out, especially with gas, right? Natural gas, right? In my opinion, every bus in the city of Oklahoma City should be running natural gas. Like,
Everything
like
on the
trash.
planet ought to be running
Yeah,
on
I
natural
mean,
gas from Oklahoma.
How many opportunities? Because we know how clean natural gas can be.
Are you
in
mostly
comparison
gas
to,
folks?
Right now, actually, most of it will.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah.
But some of
Make
that
on
is
wool.
our lack of interest in educating the outside population that doesn't understand oil and gas,
Yeah.
right? And until the last probably 10 to 5 years.
I never think that it was a lack of interest in educating. For me, growing up, I was in farming, ranching, oil and gas. We just thought everybody else knew about it, right?
Yeah,
We just
so,
thought that
right.
everybody appreciated farmers, everybody appreciated
Yeah.
like where their
Yeah,
energy
we're from
come from.
Oklahoma.
We know where it's at.
That's
Like,
what we
it wasn't a question of like, in my head, until a couple of years ago, everybody loved oil and gas because that's where energy comes from. Like, I had no clue that people despised us. It was shocking to me when I discovered it, and that's why, we're doing this right now.
So I love hearing about are we running running vehicles on CNG or natural gas? And, some of the big challenges is that it's a chicken or egg syndrome where you have the infrastructure. Just like, we've heard the same conversations with the electric cars.
We don't have an infrastructure for electric cars. That's a bogus,
Well, there
electric cars are a fun toy that are for the elite.
And some people would say that the infrastructure plan was supposed to fix that, part of that.
Well,
It should have fixed for maybe natural gas cars.
Yeah.
as far as this conversation is concerned, though, it's the same. Is that people's concern with electric cars is I don't want to drive to some Kansas City and run out of electric and then not have a place to charge. And so this very, very similar challenge exists for if we're going to shift things to natural gas or CNG type cars, which is getting that infrastructure to, then the infrastructure doesn't come unless you sell the cars, but the cars aren't going to sell if there's no infrastructure.
Well, that's why I said city buses, because to me,
You gotta say
I think we would all agree that a variety and a mixture of energy solutions for the world is the answer, right? It's not one solution.
Absolutely.
Nuclear and natural gas, and the rest of them are
City
crap.
buses can, just like my trash truck does, runs on natural gas, and those guys, they can run around
If you like
all day long on
wind
natural
solar,
gas.
then that's
and add on.
Theoretically, but what's interesting about it is that like you, I've talked to a lot of people who have gone varying distances down this path. And I personally feel like people overcomplicate it significantly. You know, I've worked for larger corporations who have entire departments to increase the accuracy of their projections by a couple percent. And then what happens? Well, oil suddenly drops from 75 to 50.
Yep.
I'm glad you had
Negative 30.
or negative 30. You had this entire department spending hundreds of man hours every quarter to improve your accuracy, when in reality, you didn't gain a lick out of that.
Do you think we'll ever see another time in our future where it went to negative 30? Was that just a one-off, like that was in our lifetime?
There were two
That will
events that
never
happened right
happen.
at the same time. I mean, I don't think you'll see
OPEC and Russia
within days.
within days.
You see what that
It was a contracts thing.
It was a contracts thing, and then you had the COVID announcement,
Yep.
the world basically shut down.
Yep.
The two black swans that happened. You were going to have low prices. I don't know if I don't know if I've ever seen anybody post.
Will we ever see
what would have
that?
happened if COVID hadn't happened? What would have happened to price? But I don't think you may be looking at a 2014-esque, you know.
Well, we kind of know what would have happened because we have the luxury of history behind us now,
Yeah.
but
But it wouldn't have been negative. It wouldn't have ever gone negative.
Negative.
no, I agree with that. But we know that world production dropped X million barrels, 10 or 20 million, sorry, I'm not all researching this, but about 20,
Yeah.
usage dropped about 20 million barrels a day across the world. And so there's smarter people than I who can sit there and back into what would that have done to commodity prices.
Yeah.
And it definitely would have impacted it,
Yeah,
but
but
never would have got to the Cushing negative 36 or whatever it was.
yeah, I was like, what was it, $37? And then I remember May contracts that we were selling was like $5.
I sold a lot of barrels at 10 cents a barrel, sadly.
It was just
Sadly.
wild.
Oh,
Like
it's
to
crazy.
think that
You get that
giving
shit?
away oil.
Or paying. I remember when all that was happening, because I was sitting there watching my oilprice.com app, and this is crazy, I'm watching this in real time.
Do you have an app that watches all of your production right now on your non-op stuff and like shows
No,
you,
I just
like-
watch commodity pricing on
Yeah.
oilprice.com.
So you have no like app that watches all of your wells at one time and collects all
Not
of
and
that?
then you can tell me, but you're really not in control of the data day to day. Normally they mail it to you. You might be lucky if they do it once a week.
So you don't have access to what's out on the well site, SCADA?
Yeah,
It's operated, for strippers,
Not
strippers,
marginal.
if you're me and you're a stripper well, if you got SCADA, awesome, good job, you probably acquired it. And that's something that you look to add to help you scale.
Right.
But in general, you're looking at maybe a daily gauge.
Okay.
You've got a
You got a
meter reading what your pumper is going to be reading. And then the thought to then bridging that to scale, if you can say, I'm going to go put a tank gauge on here, and then that same pumper can go pump 10 more wells for me, and maybe I don't have to, he doesn't charge as much for those 10 extra wells. That's where you're talking about scale at that point, because you paid X for a scale.
But if you're paying $50 a well per month,
Yep.
and you put that on 30 wells,
Yep.
are you actually saving?
So you've got there's a cost benefit to that. There's a lot of really good people that are helping with that. I think that cost is coming down.
And there's an HSC side of that, because you sit there and have a pump that's got 12 foot of fluid in it, and over the course of 20 minutes, it drops down to, it's midnight, and you're not expecting a water truck or an oil hauler,
Yeah.
and your pump starts losing volume, you can throw off an alarm.
Yep.
So there's a lot of pros and cons, and so I think that's how you see a lot of the stuff starting to get implemented.
Technology is getting cheaper, so therefore you can go out and monitor all of your wells in real time, and you can be alerted to the needs of those wells.
But the value of that is, again, outside of the ESG, I will question the real cash flow value of that for a lot of marginal wells.
Yeah, for marginal wells, it's pretty hit and miss. Something that I've done in the past is we had a bunch of gas wells. Gas gatherers will give you their gas meter readings generally, depending on the gas gatherer, they'll email them to you daily. So, okay, we got a gas well, and let's say it makes a barrel or two of fluid a day, whether it's oil or water or both. If you're getting the gas meter reading and that's the primary product, and it's not a lot of fluid, you may not have to send a pumper out there for most of the week, which is then again scaling that up. And if you're getting that email to you every day, which you can ingest and then dump into your production data entry program, that's allowing you to do things that you couldn't historically do. Historically, maybe they didn't go by there every day, but they went by there every 3 days, and they put in some value. there's ways to do it where you can put in one value and duplicate, or they'll fudge it to where it looks like they were there
The
every
third,
day.
yeah.
But generally, they may go out there every 3 days, and now they're only able to go out there, every week. And you can make the case that maybe I don't even, if it's low enough volume, or if there's no fluid at all,
No
why do I
fluid
ever
at
need to
all.
go out there at all?
Right.
Other than to maybe check for, vandalism.
HSE.
Yeah, HSE type stuff, is there a leak?
No.
But then again, you should be, if you can see sales data.
Have you run across any of those problems where you've had to go and do any remediation on your well sites?
As far as leaks or
Yeah.
anything like that, it happens. It's hit and miss. Corrosion occurs in tanks. It occurs in vessels and flow
Do
lines.
you think those, like all the marginal well operators out there, do they have the responsibility to go and fix those? Do you think they take really good care of them before the Corporation Commission ever gets involved?
They definitely want to.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I can speak to every one of them, but in general, they don't want to have those problems occur, so they're going to be very incentivized to feed it to the punch,
Yeah.
so it's not a problem, and remediate as soon as they possibly can, so they
remediation-
get the wells back online.
Remediation nowadays is not that bad. I mean, I've got a friend, George Edwards, he's been here in the podcast, he's got sacks of stuff he can go out and spread with a spreader, and bam, he eats up, it's a combination of bio cells that like go and, they eat up the hydrocarbons and also remediates the salt. And pretty cool.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do with a bag of
Technology in our industry. Guys, I love you guys being in here, and I want you guys to come back anytime you want, but before I get in trouble with your wives, I'm going to wrap this up. How do people get a hold of you, Marshall?
You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's just quick Marshall Hall search. I don't know if you can post that or anything, or Twitter. Under both, it's just search Marshall Hall. So
Search Marshall Hall. And what's the name of your company again?
Mallorn, Mallorn Energy.
You need investors? How can I help you?
If you want to invest or do something like that, definitely be interested in talking.
Yeah, if you're out there and you have money and you want to like get into oil and gas investments and you don't really want to operate and you want him to do it because he's smarter than you, reach out to him. There we go. What about you? What's American Cement?
American Seaman. Well, I'm Scott.Witt at AmericanSeamening.com, but on LinkedIn, Scott Witt, all my information is there, my phone number, my email addresses, all my email addresses. You can definitely hit me.
If you need any kind of
LinkedIn.
cement in oil and gas, this is your guy.
I am your guy. Thank you.
Or you know smarter guys than him that can
Yes.
give you the chemistry and all that.
That's the true key to most conversations.
Yeah,
Right.
bring the smart like salesman. I love you. Come in the room with your smart guy. Come on.
If I'm not
in that
smart enough to do
situation.
it, I know someone who is.
Yeah. What about you, Michael?
I'd say LinkedIn's the best way to reach me, and as far as what I need, I'd say I'm more about trying to help others.
Lagoon doesn't any sales right now. I can help Lagoon.
So Lagoon, we're always happy to help.
Every operator in Oklahoma and now the Permian, right? You guys just
we have
acquired
operations, so we've got recycled water, we've got fresh water, we've got produced water pipelines, we've got SWDs. So at the end of the day, if someone's drilling a well or has PDP production and it's near a pipeline, then we can basically get rid of your truck traffic when you consider how much trucking traffic occurs, how much water production occurs.
I'm going to have a whole nother podcast on just
We can do
oil
it.
and gas and water.
Water would be a really fascinating.
Yeah,
That would be.
absolutely. There we go. You're sitting in on another one sometime soon.
LinkedIn, Michael Dunn, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help others and pass along. I know a lot of people and happy to get you connected with others.
There we go. Guys, honored. Appreciate you all very much. These are my friends. Look them up on all their platforms, and we'll see you next time. Talking Energy Show, talkingenergyshow.com. And again, thank you, Trace Management, for the space, and we'll see you next time. Take care. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.